Takes them. Okay. Okay. Hang on. We're going live. Here we go. And we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Tonight, if you don't know who I am, I'm Rebecca Saltzman. I am a personal organization expert, and tonight I'm talking with my friend Sam Gordon, and he is a lighting specialist. He's going to introduce himself and tell us all about what he does and why he's qualified to talk about making or your appliances making Aliyah. Now, so I think this is probably, except for which bag should I bring and which shipper should I use, these are like the questions I get the most about Aliyah. Which appliances should I bring? So tonight we are going to explain how to figure out what your appliances are saying to you and what it actually means and what you need to make them work when you transform them from the US to Israel. So Sam, welcome.
Hello.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got here?
How did I get here? That's the existential question, isn't it? Well, I'll tell you a little bit about what I do with my life. So I'm a lighting designer and technician, programmer. I do a lot of different individual jobs, but I work in theater and entertainment now professionally for over a decade here in New York City, on the other side of the big pond from you. And so I've done things from Broadway shows to smaller off Broadway shows to television to fashion shows. And we use a lot of different kinds of electricity in theater, especially with technology progressing. So that's one of the reasons why I'm qualified to speak about what appliances to bring on Aliyah, even though I am not living with you in Israel and my appliances have not yet made Aliyah.
Okay.
But, I've had to wire a lot of scenery, and actually I've worked on a lot of shows that have been visiting from Europe, and we have to rewire things or use transformers and all sorts of fun gadgets to get things to work here.
Okay. So you're qualified. Yay. Okay. So let's just jump right in. I think that tonight what we're going to talk mostly about is what's voltage, what's the difference between converters, adapters, transformers, how can we tell how many watts are in an item, what do Hertz mean, and we're going to talk about everything in between. So let's dive right in with, please explain to us what is the difference between 110 and 220 voltage.
Well, it's actually relatively simple. Obviously, 220 volts is more than 110. But what it boils down to is when electricity was being invented and they started putting together power grids and systems, it just kind of is the way it ended up being decided, is that here in the US and actually also in China, they run off of a 110 volt system, which then, with the math of the electricity, things combine themselves in different ways. And then in Europe, and obviously in Israel, everything runs off of 220 volts. So it just kind of involves a little bit of a different math in terms of, how the power gets from the place in which it's made, whether that's from like wind turbines or fossil fuels, to your house, and then what's ready at your wall. So the fact that in Israel you're running a much higher voltage, the way it makes your computer actually work or any other appliance, it just has to make sure it gets the right current.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so practically, what does that mean for us?
It means that if you don't have an appliance that can kind of auto sense into either world, that you need some kind of transformer to either, if you have an American appliance, it needs to step up from 110 to 220, or if you were going the other way, it would need to step down.
Okay.
But the ironic thing is when you're purchasing a transformer, which we'll get to, since you're going in Israel from 220 to your 110 American devices, you need a step down transformer.
Okay.
So that's what it is.
As far as I know, there are transformers that can do both, right? Like you can switch them.
Yes, and we talked about privately, and I'll share with everyone, for traveling, I have this cutesy little 200 watt, uppy, downy, has every kind of plug in the world travel kit. So it's a adapter because it could just plug in, and it's a transformer. It'll just kind of adjust to anything.
Okay. So when you say like auto adjusting, does that mean, is that the same as saying dual voltage?
Yeah, I mean, I think out in like the colloquial world, we don't necessarily have like official words for some of these things. You could say dual voltage. I know here in New York, like when we're working on the big Broadway, if we have lighting units now that could do anything you want, and we actually use both 220 and 110, like in a theatrical space, because we do our own power kind of from scratch, so to speak. We call it auto sensing, which I think just sounds nicer. It makes the devices a little bit smarter.
Okay, but can we, before we explain, actually, maybe we'll hold on. Let's keep going. Converters, transformers, and adapters. What is the difference?
Right. I think this is another, sorry, I interrupted you.
No.
I think this is another like place where we get into like kind of colloquialisms, and sometimes people say converter and they mean either what I would call an adapter versus a transformer, right?
Okay.
A
converter and a transformer are the same.
I think colloquially, I think we kind of say it the same, but I think when people are deciding what they actually need, do you need like just a different plug, which is an adapter, or do you need it to change? Do you need something that changes for you? That's a transformer. Because even like these little travel things that you could plug into your wall that you can buy for $40, they are like mini transformers, but they don't have the same capacity to run your blender. They really just have the capacity to run your laptop or to run your phone. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. Yes, I just want to make sure though that says that's the difference between adapter and transformer. So where does converter fall into it then? Because then to me that functions the same. It's like converting the electricity, it's transforming the electricity. It's like just a speech pattern, right?
Right. I mean, I guess colloquially we could say converter is a transformer, but I would urge all humans to kind of back away from using the word converter and try to find the words that they're really looking for. Like, do I need an adapter or do I need a transformer?
Okay, got it. So what's the difference between an adapter and a transformer?
Right. So an adapter, I actually have one here. So this goes from some other connection, actually many, to your American household connection. So this is an adapter. It just changes the physical connection to the wall is what I would say is an adapter.
So it changes the end of the plug.
Exactly. So instead of you like cutting it off and putting one on, which we could all mess up.
Or changing a cable that's removable.
Right. Like if it's something longer like this, you could get something that's different than what you had. And then the other thing I'm explaining is a transformer.
Right.
So I guess we kind of already went over that, but a transformer is a much bulkier device, and it's going to plug into the wall with the connection of your destination, and then it kind of has a receptacle, kind of as if you had another miniature wall on your counter, as if it's its own wall. So
it's wall, transformer, and then the appliance.
Correct.
So you have like 3 stages, and the power goes through that way or that way, whichever.
Whichever way. Well, actually, the power is actually doing both, because when we say hot and neutral, like if you were rewiring something, they're both actually hot. And actually, like if you went back to like Con Edison or whoever in Israel is supplying your electricity, whoever you call them, it's actually
Chevrat Chashmal. If you're making Aliyah, get used to saying that.
Exactly. Everything is really just making a giant loop of like circuitry, like when you think about it. So actually, it's all just one big circle of electricity.
So now we know the difference between the 110 and the 220. We understand the difference between adapters, transformers. We understand now when to use an adapter versus a transformer. But let's talk about in something that's dual voltage. what's the benefit of switching a cable versus using an adapter? So for example, a computer or a printer or your cell phone or a television, those are usually dual voltage items. I have found that it's kind of a little bit cumbersome to run them with an adapter, and it's better to have a cable. But from a technical standpoint, is there a difference?
If you use an adapter, you have more points of failure. So
Okay.
I'm going to use an example of a theatrical application. If I have to run a cable that's 100 feet, am I going to use a cable that's 100 feet, or am I going to use two cables that are 50 feet? Now, if I had no more cables in my box and that's all I had, I'd have to use two 50-foot cables. But
Okay.
you have more connections. So the same thing happens when you use an adapter on the end of something that pre-exists. You now have more points of failure. So
Okay.
as a general rule, you always want to have as few points of failure as possible. So if you can just replace an actual cable that plugs into the back of your television and then plug it straight into your wall because you've looked at your television, which we'll go over in a bit, and know that your television is compatible with Israel as is.
Okay. Televisions are a whole other thing because televisions have some other like network issues, right?
Possibly, I don't.
Yeah, televisions are a whole other thing. But anyways, yeah.
Yeah. But
Okay.
yeah, I would advise as few points of failure as possible. So I would always go for an actual exchanging of a cable versus having an adapter.
Okay.
And if there's something where you're like, oh, I just want to put an adapter on it forever, like adventure with some electrical tape and like really get it on there.
Get it on there. Okay.
Not come off.
So in my experience then, I mean, just based on what you're saying to me, my best advice for people listening tonight would be take an inventory of all the things that you have, your computer, your printer, your TV, your cell phones, whatever, and invest before you come, I think, in the cables that you need to switch so that you don't have to go on a wild goose chase once you get here. And right as soon as you start unpacking your stuff, all you have to do is plug and play. Like you're good to go right away. Like in my mind, it's much better to get what you need before you come and just be ready to go. Let's just briefly, I don't know if you have it in front of you. I did not prepare this, but maybe you have it and I forgot to ask you. But can you show the difference between the Israeli plug and the US plug? Do you have something with an Israeli plug?
I do, because my little gadget. So this is a US plug. It does not have a ground. So
that means that both sides are the same, not one side is higher.
So newer appliances in the US generally have a polarized plug. So one is slightly larger or has a slight nub.
Okay.
I always advise using something with a ground, which this does not have, so I'm a bad example. I think it is just like nothing has a ground. They're like, we don't care. We believe in it. No, I don't know how it works. But anyways, this would be the European or Israeli plug. So as you can see, they're different because a US, which was invented by, or it's named after Thomas Edison. In theater, we call it an Edison plug because we have other connections in theater. This has like flat blades, and then
they're like rectangle shape.
Yeah, and then the Israeli plugs are like they're round.
They're round.
They're round.
Prongs.
Yeah, round prongs. And then this is actually, like the equivalent of like the end of a computer from Israel kind of thing. Versus in America, you kind of have the like reversed female version of the Edison. The computer we call an internal Edison plug or an IEC. So if you're looking for things on the internet, you might want to, Google.
Know how to refer them.
Yeah, IEC.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so, all right. So now we understand when to use a transformer, when to use an adapter. We now know what the difference between the voltages are. We've seen the different kinds of plugs. Let's talk about how to tell what size converter transformer that we need, because it's confusing. So I think we need to talk about wattage here, right?
Yes, yeah, because we need to know how to read the labels on our appliances so that you know you purchase the appropriate.
So I have some samples here. I'm just gonna pull them up, and we'll talk about this one. Can you see it, Sam?
I can. So this is a monitor or computer label that you would be able to read. So as you can see where it says input and it says 100 to 240 volts, that tells you right away that this
stands for volts.
V stands for volts. Yep. This is what I would call an auto sensing appliance. That you just need the right connection, right? You need the right cable, or you need to adapt it, but you don't need a transformer to run this screen or this computer. And then the other thing is that under output, it says 1.5A, which stands for amps. So that tells you that this computer or monitor only puts out 1.5 amps. What's missing from this label is how many watts this appliance is.
But it doesn't matter because it's a dual voltage or auto sensing, whatever you are saying.
Correct, but
so you don't have to actually transform the electricity.
Correct. You just need the right connection.
Okay, so this is the kind of device that you would want to change the cable on.
Correct.
Or use an adapter. Okay, great. Anything else before I move on to the next label?
I'll just point it out now before we look at more labels, but the other thing that it says under input is 50/60 hertz. And hertz has to do with electromagnetic revolutions in the world of electricity, and things that run in the United States around the 100, 120 voltage range run at 50 hertz, and then things in the Europe of the 200 to 240 voltage range run at
60 hertz.
60 hertz, yes. So that's something that we're going to pay more attention to when we see something that has one way. You want to make sure that you really read it correctly, and that's another way to tell if you skipped over the voltage part.
Okay. This one is from a washing machine, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So as we can see, this one's made for the US or Canada. So where the little yellow box is, we can see clearly that this runs on 120 volts. So you would need a transformer. It runs at 60 hertz. So still the same thing. And it has 10 amps. So it doesn't list how many watts it is. So if you really wanted to figure that out, we could talk about math. But 10 amps is, I think, about 1,000 watts without doing the actual math on my head.
Okay. All right.
So
if you were going to get a transformer for this, which we don't recommend for a washing machine, but it is possible, you would get 1,000 watts, or you would want to get something a little bit larger to manage it?
You would most likely want to get something that's enough for 2,000 watts or at least 1,500 watts. So you would want, which would equivalent to 15 amps or 20 amps of power. Yeah, that's you always want to have like a gap. I don't know if people can still see while we're showing the screen, but I just made a gap in my hands. You always want.
I can't see us.
People always want leeway with the electricity. You don't want to have the maximum on the maximum. That is a way to run into problems.
Got it. All right. So this one is a European appliance label.
Yes. So this gets a little tricky because you see it says 230 to 240, and you're like, what? So yeah, so this is obviously only for Europe. So if you're buying appliances in Israel, they will probably say something like this, and then they're going to say 50 hertz because of the higher voltage. The revolutions of the magical magnetic fields run at slightly slower per minute rate, and then because of the possible fluctuation in your wall current, this one actually tells you how many watts the appliance is versus the amp. So it says it's 1,850 to 2,000 watts. So that's a pretty powerful appliance. So it's like the whole circuit basically.
So if you were getting a transformer for this one, you would need at least 2,500 watts.
Yes, although I'm not sure if they sell something like that. Oh, they probably do. But that
we have a 2,000 watt one.
Yeah, a 2,000 watt one. That's
It's standard. You think?
Standard. Yeah, anything larger. If you're looking for 30 amps, I think that gets into things that we don't usually touch in our home, unless it's stove.
Okay. All right. All right. And finally, we have this one, which is for a food steamer.
Yeah, this is pretty easy label. It's towards the top under the model number, so it's 120 volts, and it's 900 watts. So, a food steamer, you probably would need the same transformer as you would use for like a larger appliance, like a Vitamix blender or a stand mixer, something along those lines. Yeah.
Okay. So if you have so this one was 900 watts. I'll just put that up again. This one is 900 watts. And if you were using something that's like a transformer that's 2,000 watts, would you have any problems, or that would be okay?
No, that's better, because you have the leeway of, if that transformer has two receptacles on it, and you wanted to make a cup of coffee and use your steamer at the same time, or you have another small appliance that I can't think of right now, but another smaller,
I haven't really seen. Have you seen them with two outlets? Because I only see them usually with one.
In the theater, we just have everything.
I think for like for home use, I think it's like probably not something that is readily available, because then you have to do the math and balance the load.
Yeah, I stayed at home and think about that when I realized that most of my apartment is run off of 2 circuits, and the building is 90 years old. And I was like, oh, good thing I switched over all my light bulbs to LEDs that draw no power, because the lights were also on those same 2 circuits. Never hurts to do a little addition.
Okay, so definitely be conscientious if your transformer does have multiple hookups for multiple plugs, to make sure you're balancing the load and you're not overextending the load at the same time. So then you would just basically add the 2 wattages.
Yeah, so if something's 900 and something's 1,500, that is more than 2,000.
2,000. Yeah. Okay, so you don't want to do that. Okay.
Yeah, and it depends on your building. Like, I live in an older building where my circuits got upgraded to 20 amps, but a lot of older buildings, even here, like in New York, have 15 amp circuits, so you can't plug in as many appliances.
Got it. Okay. And this is just a public service announcement, but definitely unplug your appliances when you aren't using them, specifically transformers, because the transformers get really hot because the electricity is still going through them. There's just there's no way for them to exit, right?
That's true. You could even think of it as the same way as if you ever put your hand on your laptop's box with the cord, and it's pretty warm. That's because those are actually little miniature transformers to go from 110 to the 24 or 12, however small amount of power that your laptop needs. So also this, for our planet and Hashem, unplug appliances, but especially with a transformer, and you'll probably be glad when you get your power bill.
Okay. Also, you don't want to destroy your transformer or any of your electrical appliances by having it wears them out, right?
Yeah, unless there's a way to shut it off, unless your transformer has a switch on it that it's switched off. I know on my Vitamix it has a switch, so I can switch it off and leave it plugged into the wall. It's not pulling additional power. That would be the only exception.
I think a lot of the basic model transformers definitely don't have those switches. So
yeah, then I would definitely unplug it. Make sure to turn off your appliance before you unplug the transformer. You want to have as many neat and pretty organized electrical practices. I know this can probably be overwhelming when you're getting ready for Shabbos, or you have a busy day in the kitchen, and you're just kind of I need this. Oh my gosh, I need that. But take that extra moment to think. You don't want to ruin an expensive transformer for your kitchen.
Right. Or the appliance, which are expensive to replace here.
Yes, and that's the reason you're bringing you bought the transformer to bring your appliances in the first place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about, we talked about this briefly, but I just want to explain it a little bit more. The Hertz. So the Hertz we're saying that those are the revolutions per minute for how often the appliance is going. It's 50 or it's 60, depending on the flow of electricity. But what does that mean, like, from a practical standpoint with our appliances, and which appliances is it important to, like, note that are really, like, if it's going to be a problem if the Hertz aren't lining up?
Right. So the Hertz, they're actually named after the guy that did the scientific discovery, but it has to do with electromagnetic fields and how many times electromagnetic fields are, like, spinning per minute. So revolutions per minute. But basically what this boils down to on a practical standpoint is certain appliances that are not auto-sensing for the kitchen. And some maybe outside of the kitchen that we can probably do without and not bring on Aliyah. They're just not going to be happy when you're trying to convert electricity because they're going to get confused. And these are most appliances that have some kind of clock or counting device in it, like possibly an Instant Pot. I know we didn't specifically talk about Instant Pot.
We didn't. Instant Pots are, I believe, a little bit of a problem, but also a bread machine or a stove.
Right. I mean, and if you were bringing, like, if for some reason you're buying a house in Israel and you've measured and you know that you can bring your stove, that's something where you need to, you're like, I love my stove, I'm breaking it. You definitely need to have a professional certified electrician in Israel come in and make sure that you have a designated outlet for such a product and that it's getting, your American 110 volt electricity. But even in America, we actually have stoves that run off of like 230. They're mostly like commercial stoves, but like there might be some people that have really fancy kitchens and they might be bringing their really fancy, awesome stove. So it's just something to be aware of. If you have like an exception of bringing such an appliance, you need a certified professional to help you with it. If you just plug it into the wall with a transformer, it's going to be confused and the clock is not going to work. It's just not going to function appropriately. And it'll probably just break down. And then instead of selling it or giving it away to someone who can't afford one, it's now broken. And I know I've talked about reducing waste. So, you don't want to bring something if it's going to end up in the garbage.
Right. Well, okay. So I'll just say this as an aside, not necessarily related to electricity, but the advantage of buying appliances here in Israel is that you get the warranty attached with them. And if you buy American appliances, even American appliances that have the voltage and the wattage transformed for Europe, you don't have any warranty. You have no recourse if something breaks. You're going to have to pay a technician to come, and then they might not have the parts, and it could be broken for a long time. If you buy something that's made in Israel, or even if it's not made, nothing's made in Israel, but like made for the Israeli market, even if it's imported from Europe, which basically everything is, it's still going to work better because we have the official importers who, if something breaks, they can get you the part relatively quickly. Even during times like now, Corona time, like our stove broke a few months ago. We needed a new electrical, an element. We needed a new element.
Oh,
and the guy's like, yeah. And the guy's like, okay, sure, I can get it for you tomorrow. But like, they might not have it on hand, but you're not going to have to wait 6 weeks to get parts if you actually buy the stuff. Plus you'll have the appliances, the warranties, and the repair people know how to service these appliances because these are appliances that they see all the time versus the American ones where they're not as familiar with them.
Something else to mention is that technically, if you read your manual on your appliances from America, if you use a transformer and you don't plug it directly into the wall, you've technically voided your warranty. So if this will happen to, let's say, your precious Vitamix blender, which is the one I keep mentioning because I recently...
I love my Vitamix too. We use it every day.
Like technically it says never even use an extension cord. And I'm like, what? Like, what if I just can't reach? Like, they make the corner.
It's not a long cable. I know it's not a long cable.
I know.
Okay, so I just want to quickly mention the appliances that I brought with me on Aliyah and explain why I brought them, and then we're gonna. I think that's everything, and we'll talk about lamps. But I brought with me my KitchenAid mixer, my Cuisinart food processor, my Vitamix blender, and I think that's it. I did buy a crock pot in America that was meant for Israel with a proper plug and proper voltage. So we brought that already with us, and that's been working fine. We also brought our ice cream. All those things have been working fine with our transformer. We also brought our ice cream maker, which was a big mistake because the ice cream maker makes too many revolutions per minute and it will shut down because the machine gets too hot and it's trying to cool itself because it's making ice cream, right? And it can't function. Another machine, not to bring, I mentioned is a bread machine because those have timers and the timer is essential to the functioning of the machine. So that is also an appliance I would buy here in Israel. I don't think it's worth it to bring small appliances like hand mixers or a bay mixer because they're so inexpensive here and it's so much easier to use it with the correct plug, which means you don't have to worry about balancing the load. And like two people can do something. One person can run, the Cuisinart, and another person can run like a hand mixer on a different outlet if you're not worried about balancing the load. What else? Oh, let's talk about hair dryers in the bathroom for a minute.
Yes.
Hair dryers take up a lot of wattage. Tell me what you told me about the bathroom because I think it's better if everybody hears it from you.
Right. So in a bathroom, also in your kitchen, at least here in America, we are required by law to have circuits that trip in the case of a water hazard emergency. These are labeled as a GFCI, which stands for Ground Fault Circuit Interrupter. That all said, even if you have something that is compatible with both, or something like a hairdryer that takes a lot of power that you would need a transformer for, I would avoid using a transformer in the bathroom because of water. It could be a huge safety hazard. And when I say you could get electrocuted, electrocution actually equals death. If you get and you're like, ow, and you're okay, that's called getting shocked. So it's really important. You really do not want to get actually electrocuted. I have learned recently that actually in America on job sites, electrocution is, shocks are actually a huge cause of death because if you're on a ladder at a job, then you might fall off. So it could be the same thing in your bathroom. If you got shocked because you didn't have a ground fault interrupter, and then you banged your head on a stone, that's a very serious injury. The only way I would say to make an exception for this is if you bought a specific transformer that has this like water compatible capability with it, that has a built-in GFCI. So that's another little thing to write down, GFCI, if people are taking notes.
But here's the thing about these transformers. First of all, a blow dryer is usually about 2,000 watts. And like you would need at least a 2,500 watt transformer. Moving the transformer, these things are heavy. They weigh like,
they are very heavy.
I don't know, like 50 pounds. They are not light. They're little, but they are really, really heavy. So like you don't want to be moving it between the kitchen and the bathroom unless you want to like blow dry your hair in the kitchen. That's fine. But like,
Yeah, I mean, from a practical standpoint, I don't think about that. I think about safety. But yes, you don't.
From a practical standpoint, it's like not a good idea. So I always say
that could be your workout. Taking the transformer back and forth to the bathroom. We can't go outside.
But from a practical standpoint, I feel like it's better if you buy a blow dryer or a straightener or something, either here in Israel, buy a travel edition that is dual voltage, or to buy a European model before you come where the plug and the voltage is going to be correct. This way you don't need a transformer or an adapter.
It'll just make your life easier. And, you're in the morning and you haven't had your coffee yet and You know, for someone that blow dries their hair in the morning, I don't think you want to be dealing with adapters and ground fault and trouble. You just want to go.
Same with hair straighteners, by the way, though those use less voltage.
Yeah, those use very little, actually.
Right. Some other things that you might need a transformer for, and which have lower loads, are air mattresses. And in that case, you will probably want a smaller, not a 2,000 watt, maybe 1,000 watt. And those are smaller, they weigh less, and they're more manageable to take throughout the house. And oftentimes game consoles are
something like what I bought for traveling that goes with the other bitsies I showed you. You know, if this is when you have to read labels when you're buying things. I know this only can handle like 200 watts. So that's like a few computers or a gaming system or your air mattress inflator device, something like that. But you could, I mean, something like this is $40 versus, you know, the heavy duty transformers.
Exactly.
This doesn't really weigh anything. It just makes noise and has a light. You don't want to put that in your bedroom because all night you're going to hear a fan.
Really? Okay, so
I discovered this.
Maybe you can post in the comments the model number, and people will know not to buy that one, and they'll buy something else.
Oh yeah, no, I'll have to look. I bought it so long ago, I don't remember.
Okay, so is there anything else you think that we should know?
I think before we move on, I looked at the comments, and Arlene has a question about where do we find this information on our laptops or our cell phones. It's usually on when you have, I'm going to use my little device as an example, but if you have some kind of square or rectangular device in between the place where it plugs into your computer and plugs into the wall, this is going to have this information on it. And it's going to be near the
it's like here, like this guy is going to say it. This is like the cable, the brick from the, so like, for example, let me see if I can get it into the camera here.
Yeah,
you can read that.
With cell phones, you know, now that we have all these cell phones that have like a charging cable and then you have a brick, I would say get a new brick for Israel because your American brick is probably not compatible with Israel. I'm just going to kind of put that information out there without checking it. But also, like, cables are just cables. So your USB cable is just a USB cable, like, you know, USB to whatever connection your phone is, Lightning, USB-C, whatever that is. So I would just get a new little physical brick to plug your phone in Israel. You know, if you have some, like a travel
they're really cheap. They're not expensive.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and I mean, I've noticed here in America, like when one's broken, if I buy a super cheap one, it's usually not that great. So like, you know, if there's one that's like 2 shekels and one that's like 10 shekels or whatever they you know, cost, buy the one that's a few more because the cheaper ones usually are just poor quality and don't connect.
Don't need a brick in most cases. Okay, so somebody said you don't need a brick in most cases, just a power cord. I'm not sure what you're referring to. The brick, even the little piece on the end of the phone, the part that plugs in, that's still a brick.
Yeah, I mean, if it's dual voltage, then you don't need a different one. Yeah.
Well, what I just showed you. Whoop, here I am. This is still considered a brick, right?
Yeah, I mean, technically, from my point of view, that's like a miniature transformer. Like, if you're like, what is this really? But, you know, we don't need to get into like.
Okay, so we're just using that as like the colloquial version. Yeah, okay. So, Arlene, I hope that answers your question. If you have a follow-up question, please go ahead and post. And if anybody else watching has a question, we'll definitely answer questions. Okay, so Sam, before we move on to lamps, anything else that you think we should know?
I think we covered everything. As like a little safety steward, like unplug things before you use them. Make sure they're on before you plug them in. If you're in an area with water, be really careful about that. And I don't know what the rules are in Israel, but if you can get like, you know, the ones that trip that have the little reset button like we do in America in your homes in Israel, if you're not renting, definitely go that route because it's safer and you don't want to have any like life-threatening emergencies.
Okay. The other thing that I think what people should know here is that if you want, it's harder to find, I feel like it's in my experience, it's been a little bit harder to find a power like one of those panels that you showed before where there's like lots of different plugs, like normally a surge protector. That's the word I'm looking for. It's harder to find a surge protector. Right. So you can get one of those where it's just like, it doesn't really have, like not a breaker really. Like it has some of them. Yeah. So
like
mostly it's much easier to find those here. It's harder to find ones that have on and off switches. And it's even harder to find ones that have built-in surge protectors.
Interesting.
So definitely that's something that if you can buy it before you come with the correct voltage and plug, it's definitely, in my opinion, worth bringing, especially if you have a desktop computer.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Especially,
and if you're going to run a printer or a scanner or a fax machine.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about lamps.
Well, this is kind of a two-part thing that goes into organizing and decluttering. I would say, unless you are really in love with your lamps or lighting fixtures, like part with them, because you're going to need two different new things. You're going to need new light bulbs, or in theater we call them lamps, but we call the actual thing that holds it a fixture.
Okay.
But in real life, people just call them lamps.
Right.
They call the bulb a bulb because most of them are actually an A-shaped bulb. But in America, we have this 110 system, and in Israel, you have the 220. So the light bulbs themselves are actually rated for separate, and you have to be super careful. Like you absolutely cannot plug in a 110 volt lamp in Israel because it will pop.
Light bulb.
Yeah, it will be the light bulb itself. You need to throw away, recycle, donate your light bulbs before you move to Israel. Don't even bring them with you. It is not worth it. So when you get to Israel, you will need to buy new actual light bulbs. If you are so in love with your fixtures that you're going to bring them. And then, obviously you need to change the plugs. So if you're me, you would buy the little plugs and then chop off the American ones and rewire them yourself. But this is a case where if you just get an adapter, just a little physical thing, that it would be the opposite of this. It would go to Israeli plug, a European plug instead of US.
So it would have the round prongs on it.
Exactly. That's my suggestion with that. So you need to make sure everything's correct on both sides, because the actual wires inside of a lamp or an appliance, wires are just wires. And if you are not me, I would also suggest, if you don't want all these little adapters on the end of all these fixtures you can't part with that you brought with you to Israel, this is somewhere else. I would suggest hire a professional electrician that will redo the plugs for you if you're someone that you're going to see the plug and you want less kind of physical clutter at the actual outlet. I would suggest that. Being a new OLED, you're probably going to get ripped off or something by an electrician, but
no.
Who knows?
I don't think that's true.
I hope not. I'm just kidding. I had my outlets redone here, and when they said how much it cost, I was like, oh my gosh, I could have just done it myself. But you can't actually do it yourself legally here. I can't do it legally because I'm not a household certified electrician.
Got it.
It was more I could do it myself if no one finds out.
Okay. So I know we didn't talk about this before, but can we talk about ceiling fans? Because a lot of people bring those with them as well.
Oh, ceiling fans. I would assume.
Do you know anything about that?
Not specifically, but since it has a motor, there could be a problem. But that's you're bringing. Usually a ceiling fan goes with a lighting fixture, so that's something where you actually unwired it from your house in America.
Well, no, you bought a new one. You bought a new one, let's say.
You bought a new one.
Because they're expensive here.
Yeah. That I would make sure you buy it wired for Europe.
Okay.
It needs to be 220 because it spins, and that is something that has to get installed. So you're going to need a professional anyways. you want to ensure that it's going to work for Israel because it has a spinning motor, and it will probably overheat if it needed to be converted. And how are you going to do that, like in a ceiling? That sounds complicated and a headache.
Okay. One last thing that I think that we should talk about, because this is also a question that I get, is the vacuum cleaner. And I'll just give you my take on it, and then I'd love to hear what you think. Vacuum cleaners are not worth it to bring unless you have a European model, because you're going to run into the issue with, first of all, the cable for the vacuum cleaner itself is probably not going to be long enough to reach to wherever you have the transformer. It's definitely going to need a transformer. The transformer is heavy, and you don't want to schlep the vacuum and the transformer with you. But also, because it's running, the watts are different, the hertz are different. Sorry, the hertz are different. I think that it's not really worth running it on the transformer. It's just better to buy it here.
I would agree with that assessment, unless you have a vacuum-powered vacuum. A battery. Word.
A battery.
Sorry, I've been up probably as long as you have been up since 2 o'clock here. But if you have a battery-powered vacuum that you're like, I absolutely love it, and it would be really expensive in Israel, that's something where I guess you could take it, but then when you charge it, you need to make sure you're using your transformer. It's
not really worth the effort, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and I feel like with something like a Roomba, you could just get a new home base for Israel that you could probably do here, and then you don't have to worry about. I haven't even looked at mine to see if it would be compatible, but.
Well, you can easily buy a European model of an iRobot or any of those things. I don't know. To be honest, I don't know if they're dual voltage. You would for sure need an adapter for the plug.
Yeah, I was gonna say mine's right next to me on the floor. I could look, but we shan't waste our time.
We can maybe post it. We can check and post in the comments.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else that we should?
I don't like the Roomba itself is probably mostly the same. It's like the actual home, the charging station. That's the issue for any of these devices that are battery powered.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Anything else you think we should know, Sam, before we say goodnight?
No,
night, Sam.
I think for me it's good night too. I'm usually at work. No, I think we covered pretty much everything, and the only other thing I would mention is if someone is savvy enough that they want to rewire appliances by themselves, just be aware that the color coding system in America is different than Europe and Israel. So in Israel and Europe, it's can be this or that, and it's a little bit the same in America because you have older things and newer things. But in America, the green cable is always the ground because grass. But in Israel, that's not necessarily true. In Israel and Europe, it's usually brown for dirt, and then blue is usually neutral, but that's not necessarily always true.
It's not dirt, it's sand.
In Israel, it would be sand. Very good. So that's just something to be aware of. And, if you do need to rewire something, or you have a television set that needs to be replugged and it wore off or something, either have nail polish if you already have nail polish, or I would say if you can get electrical tape, they usually sell it in sets with all the colors you need, and just be sure to remark things as you go so you don't get confused. But if you do need something rewired, you probably should consult a professional that will help you.
Definitely consult a professional.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm I'll just do it myself, but that's because I also rewired things that come from Europe for shows here in America, and it's
please call a professional.
Will it explode? No.
All right, Sam, thank you so much for joining us. I hope that this has been eye-opening for everybody watching. If you have any questions, please post in the comments, or you can reach out directly to me, Rebecca at RebeccaSaltzman.com. That's REBEKAH. And Sam, if people have a question and want to reach out to you, how can they reach you?
They can reach me at sam@samgordondesign.com via email.
Excellent.
Yeah.
or they can find you on Facebook or Instagram.
I guess so. I am Sam Gordon LD on the Instagram.
Okay, on the
and
gram.
since all the theaters are closed right now, I am mostly posting pictures of Canada geese in the park. So if you like geese, I'm your person.
Follow Sam.
Right? Thank you for having me. This was really fun.
Oh, I'm so glad that you enjoyed being had. All right, so thank you everybody for watching. Have a fabulous night, and if you're making Aliyah soon, please, you can reach out to talk to me. I'm happy to help you plan your Aliyah, and if you have any further questions, you can always feel free to reach out to me. For now, I'm Rebecca Saltzman. Happy organizing, and Mazel Tov on your Aliyah.